Michael Collins became Director of Intelligence in 1919, and he went about setting up an effective intelligence unit to counter the British. Before that, there had been intelligence from the IRA, but it wasn't working for the organisation. So he started gathering intelligence across Dublin, especially with the help of spies within Dublin Castle such as David Nelligan, and within the DMP such as Ned Broy, Joe Kavanagh and a couple of other men. I think Joe Kavanagh was the first link to spies working for Michael Collins. He then went about setting up an office in number 3 Crow Street with the help of Frank Thornton, Tom Cullen and Liam Tobin. So they would have been his assistant directors. But this video is going to show the graves of some of Michael Collins' spies and his intelligence network and the people that worked in the intelligence division of the IRA. The IRA's intelligence staff during the War of Independence consisted of Michael Collins as the Director of Intelligence, Liam Tobin as Deputy Director, Tom Cullen as Second Deputy Director, and then finally Frank Thornton as Third Deputy Director. These would have all operated out number 3 Crow Street in Dublin city centre and a number of other hideouts throughout the city. They would have helped coordinate the spies in Dublin Castle and the DMP, and then also the spies that worked in the bars, restaurants and hotels across the city who helped the IRA. Frank Thornton was heavily involved in the organisation of the IRA in Northern Ireland, including South Armagh, Cavan, Leitrim and Meath. And he was also directly involved in the assassination of Henry Lee Wilson down in Gorey in County Wicklow, who had picked out Sean McDermott following the 1916 Easter Rising. He survived the War of Independence and the Civil War. And Liam Tobin would have went on to be a general in the National Army, and he later dropped out of the army due to the mutiny in 1924. But he was a Cork man, just like Collins himself. And both of these men, Liam Tobin and Frank Thornton, are buried side by side in Glasnevin Cemetery. And
interrogated or perhaps arrested, and you still had people in the DMP particularly perhaps who were able to help them. Was this a fairly frequent occurrence, would you say?
Well, not very often, because once you got into the grips, it was very difficult to get them out. That's what happened in the case of Dick McKee and Paddy Clancy, on the eve of Bloody Sunday. They were arrested in their own houses and they were brought to Dublin Castle. And we didn't know where they were. Couldn't find out, even through our agents. Because what happened there, they were brought into the auxiliary headquarters, and they found out who they were on the Sunday, and they just murdered them.
So Tom Cullen was Second Deputy Director of Intelligence, making him number 3 after Michael Collins and I believe Liam Tobin. And he was from County Wicklow. So he was involved in the War of Independence and was said to be one of Michael Collins' best intelligence men. And he operated in number 3 Crow Street. He would then go on to serve in the Irish Free State, becoming a major general. And he would unfortunately die from either drowning or asphyxia in 1926. And he's buried here in Rathnew Cemetery. So this is the grave of Tom Cullen. So it reads, "Pray for the soul of Major General Thomas J. Cullen, who served under Michael Collins in the Anglo-Irish War and was accidentally drowned on June 20th, 1926. May he rest in peace. Erected by his friends and comrades in arms." And then pray for his wife, so Delia Cullen, who died August 27th, 1933. So Tom Cullen would have been number 3 in the list of intelligence men. Michael Collins would have been first as Director of Intelligence for the IRA, and I think it was Liam Tobin who was second, and then Tom Cullen was third. So these would have worked with the spies, helped get informers, and then also worked with the squad in targeting people to be executed. And he was involved in Bloody Sunday, going out on the raids and involved in some of the attacks. So that was Major General Tom Cullen, the younger brother of Emmett Dalton, and he was part of Michael Collins' intelligence unit. So he was only 17 when he was working for Collins during the War of Independence, and he would have been involved in the 1916 Easter Rising. He was the younger brother of Emmett Dalton. This is his grave here. So Charles Francis Dalton, Lieutenant, or late Colonel, 2nd Battalion, Dublin Brigade, Old IRA, 1916 to 1922. So he was very young when he was operating with Michael Collins, and he would have definitely worked out of Crow Street in Temple Bar. So him, along with the likes of Pierce Besley, would have drawn up the lists of spies and informers and other men to be executed during Bloody Sunday in 1920. And it's said that he suffered with his mental health. Obviously, it wasn't known then what it would have been, but it was his mental health following the War of Independence and what he had done. Now, I read some reports that he had stated he would have nightmares where he could hear the blood of the people that he had been involved in their executions dripping through the floorboards and asking for forgiveness. Now, I read that in a couple of different things, but that could easily be made up. But he definitely did have a medical pension and an IRA pension because of his activities. But he's the lesser known younger brother of Emmett Dalton, who would have been good friends with Michael Collins, and who's buried in Glasnevin Cemetery. But Charles Dalton is buried here. And his a grandson reached out on TikTok to say he'd seen one of the videos. So if you're watching this, I hope I'm doing him a little bit of justice. And yeah, this is a grave. Now, trying to find all of Michael Collins' spies and informers is kind of difficult because of the nature of their work. Some of them mightn't have wanted to come forward even after independence, but 2 of Michael Collins' DMP spies died before the end of the Civil War, and one of them was Joseph Kavanagh. And I believe, from what I could read and find, he was the first person to reach out towards the IRA to give information. And from what I can find, he, along with James McNamara, was also kind of found out, and he stepped away from being a police officer, but he died shortly afterwards from some sort of ulcer. It's not a medical reason anyway. He didn't die from fighting, but this I believe is his grave. Now, there's a bit of a mix-up from what I can find. In lots of books it's spelt with a K, but this is spelt with a C, but his dates of death match up with what I can find. But this is Joseph Kavanagh, and he was the first man to start informant for the IRA, and then he was taken on by Michael Collins, and he might have introduced either Nelligan or Broy to Michael Collins. But he died before the end of even the War of Independence. But this is Joseph McNamara. So both him and James McNamara died before the end of the Civil War. So due to that reason, David Nelligan and Ned Broy both became more known figures because they wrote books and they had like a long career afterwards. But Joseph Kavanagh was one of Michael Collins' another lesser known spy. So he had, in total, from what I could find, 4 DMP officers on his side. Ned Broy. So he was a detective in the Dublin Metropolitan Police, and he passed along information and helped Michael Collins find out who was the most effective Dublin Metropolitan Police officers. And he worked in Great Brunswick Street Station, which is now Pearse Street Garda Station. And between January and April, it was Ned Broy is believed to have helped Michael Collins learn how to use intelligence effectively and to gather intelligence and set up a network. So in the movie, Ned Broy is depicted as working within Dublin Castle, but that was actually David Nelligan. But one scene that is true is that Ned Broy did sneak Michael Collins into the DMP intelligence office records, but this was actually in Great Brunswick Street Station. So over the course of 1919 to 1919, 3 DMP officers, Patrick Smith, Daniel Hohey and John Barton, were executed by the squad, while plenty of others were shot, intimidated and forced to resign. So when this happened, a man was sent down in late 1919, early 1920. John Charles Redmond. He is the man depicted in the Michael Collins movie dying in a car bomb in Dublin Castle, which didn't actually happen. It was an assassination by John Daly, and he's actually buried in Mount Rome Cemetery, but I wasn't able to find his grave. That'll appear in another video, along with some of the other targets of the squad. That'll appear in a video that I have. But Ned Broy went on he remained a spy. He was eventually discovered in late 1920 after Bloody Sunday, and he was arrested in February 1921. And during the treaty negotiations, which happened in July 1921, he was one of the only people that Michael Cullen said must be released before the negotiations got underway. And he went on, after being in prison for 6 months in solitary confinement, he went on to be Michael Cullen's secretary and bodyguard in London during the treaty negotiations. Then he would go on to be a Garda Commissioner in 1933, and he has a bad record there. He led a group known as the Broy Harriers to work against the IRA and the Blue Shirts, but he was also the Garda Commissioner. So Ned Broy was one of the key spies for Michael Collins. And before David Nelligan and Ned Broy spied for Michael Collins, there was two men that operated before him, James McNamara, who's buried here, and a Joseph Kavanagh. So Joseph Kavanagh is believed to have started passing along information just after 1916, and I can't really find much information on when James McNamara started. But when Ned Broy contacted Michael Collins, he actually met James McNamara, who was one of his friends, at a meeting point somewhere in Dublin, and he didn't realise that McNamara had been passing along information to Collins for a couple of months before Ned Broy started. But James McNamara was close to being found out, and I believe he was either arrested or the suspicion came, but he was fired from the Dublin Metropolitan Police. And after that, I kind of can't really find much information on him, but he then joined the National Army and the Dublin Guard under Paddy Daly. But he was killed in an accident on Grafton Street in September 1922, aged 28 years old. So he was one of the 4 DMP officers who spied for Michael Collins, and he's buried here, this big family plot in Glasnevin Cemetery. But that's James McNamara, one of Michael Collins' other lesser known spies. But David Nelligan, one of Michael Collins' spies, who would have been given information to the... Oh, here we go. So this is the grave of David Nelligan. So you'll see it here, Commandant David Nelligan. Oh, sorry, moving a little closer. Commandant or Colonel David Nelligan. So it reads here, it's been carved out, the spy in the castle. So in the movie Michael Collins, he had 3 main spies, but they were actually amalgamated into one character called Ned Broy. He did exist, but he actually worked in the DMP offices, so the Dublin Metropolitan Police Office. He fed information from the Dublin Metropolitan Police to Collins, whereas David Nelligan was actually working in Dublin Castle. So he was working with the spies and the men who were involved in, like the men that would have been executed during Bloody Sunday, and some of them would have been also involved with the spy networks. But David Nelligan he was one of the main spies. He was amalgamated into the movie. But that's his grave, just a short walk from where Paddy O'Daly is buried.
So you copied down the details of what the G Division men were at.
I memorised them.
You memorised them. Then how did you pass that information to Collins?
Yes. I met some other squad every day, generally Charlie Dalton and Frank Solon. I never worked as hard as on my bottom days. No man can serve 2 masters, but I kept them going.
I'll just retrace my steps here, because we're aiming to find another person that was connected with Michael Collins, and she was a woman by the name of Elizabeth Lily Marin, and she worked for a secretary within one of the barracks during the War of Independence. I cannot remember her exact position, or like the exact person that she worked for, but it was a fairly high position, and what she would do, she would write up the dispatches for the corporal or the lieutenant, whoever she was working under. I can't remember the exact details, but she would copy them as they were being written and have them sent out to Michael Collins. And some of these dispatches would be getting sent down the country, down to Cork, Tipperary and stuff, and obviously at the time it was trains and buses and the like, so it took a while. But because of the work she done, Michael Collins would sometimes have the dispatches before the people who were, the officers who were to receive them. So he would sometimes have information ahead of them and be able to warn the IRA members in the area or plan attacks. And she did that for a number of years. I think she was a cousin or a friend of Pierce Paisley, and that's how Michael Collins got in touch with her. And the sad thing about her grave is there's no headstone. So the marking of the grave is known. Yeah, I just found it. So how I found it is there's a website called Find a Grave, and sometimes there's images people have done where they've visited locations before and taken images. So Lily Marin, a spy for Michael Collins, is buried here without a headstone, which I think is awful. It's just not a mark, not a cross, there's nothing there for her. So she acted as a spy and a secretary, and then after the War of Independence she worked within, I'm going to say within the army as a secretary, continued her work, never married, possibly had a child, but there was a little bit of sketchy information on that, and then passed away and probably didn't have enough money for a headstone.